imagining yourself inside this conversation, you're either doing it yourself or you're potentially considering acquiring something that already exists. Now, in either capacity, you got to have an entrance strategy, right? And I even think about myself, I'm guilty about this. Like when we started our company, we might have had an exit or an entrance strategy. I don't know if we would call it that technically, but we definitely didn't have an exit one, right? So tell us why these are just critical parts from the lens that you see it through.
Yeah, the reality is almost any small business is a very illiquid asset. But if you're successful, it's a huge part of your net worth. So trying to figure out how you take advantage of that is a challenge. And people tend not to think about it until they're getting tired of doing what they're doing, or they fall ill, or something happens where they're forced to make some change. And it's the last thing on the mind of somebody starting a business is how do I get out of this someday? But it's something that everybody has to deal with one way or another.
The part that just flies up for me, it's almost like a word that just like up in lights is the concept of due diligence, right? So walk. I know it depends, but is there like a general sort of approach to due diligence that you suggest?
Yeah, and it's a simple one of build a team of people who are knowledgeable in the area that you're looking at, and rely on them. And it's got to be people you're comfortable with and that you're going to take the advice of. That's absolutely critical. And it's costly, unfortunately, for most things. You're going to be, depending on what you're buying, if you're buying a business, you're buying a piece of property, you're going to spend money on experts or, financial analysis of it. But it's critical to get done unless you have that talent yourself, unless that's one of your innate, tools in your personal toolkit.
Where you know just enough to get yourself in trouble?
Yeah. Well, some people are pretty sophisticated, but, everybody has limits to that. Yeah. So he's talking to you specifically, Truth Nation, who's listening in right now. Yeah. So it's something to build a team with and do it right up front. And let's unpack that a little bit. So, if you had maybe, a 3 or 4 stable horsemen for that have to be part of that team, right? Where would you start with? Maybe we can go down that line. It doesn't have to necessarily be in chronological order because that's going to depend maybe for everybody in your situation. But what would you say the core principles of those are? You want a good tax advisor. Yeah. You want a good legal advisor. In most instances, you're going to want some kind of a broker, whether that's a real property broker, whether that's a personal property broker. I mean, there are people out there who specialize in buying and selling businesses. Right. And that's a tough business. Yeah. And it's most small businesses survive these days by being fairly specialized. And that makes them even more difficult to sell. Because it's tough to compete with, if you're in the restaurant business, if you're in the fast food business, it's tough to compete with McDonald's. They've been doing it forever. They've got McDonald's University out there. It's a science for them. But what I heard you say, if you're competing on a retail level, you're competing with Walmart and Costco. I mean, those are giant. And now Amazon. And Amazon. Amazon's not getting into the actual physical store realm. Yeah. And even when they're not, it's easy for people to find what they want online. Yeah. But what you said, though, a second ago, I want to backtrack because I think there's a huge aha moment in there, which is McDonald's is the universe, but the riches are always in the niches. Right. Right. So and I don't know if there's even a question here behind this, but like that concept of the specialization, so I think the goal is don't try to be McDonald's. Absolutely. Figure out what pain McDonald's is creating for people, what gap they've created, and fill that gap. Absolutely. And that makes your business unique. And that's what's attractive to the customer. But that's what makes it difficult to sell. No question. So a lot of small businesses, sales occur to people inside the business. Somebody you hired 10 years ago who's worked hard and really knows how to do things is one of your most likely buyers. Yeah. The challenge for them is how do they get financing? Right. And that goes back to the part of what they maybe aren't good at. Maybe they're a great technician, but they're not a very good entrepreneur. Right. Go back to the old Michael Gerber E-Myth thing. Okay, so let's unpack that a little bit. So we talked a little bit about the broker, and I totally agree with you, man. That is a super interesting job. One of my friends actually just went through that whole process, got themselves a franchise, which maybe could be a whole different show we talk about. But the broker helped them with that. What about CPA? Now, other than it being obvious,
right? Let's unpack that just a little bit so people can get a little bit better of a context about why that's such a critical piece to have in the pie.
Oh, it's critical on a number of levels. I mean, a good CPA not only handles your taxes, they help you control risk inside the business, avoid embezzlement, avoid those kind of losses. They help you account for what you have and keep track of it. And if you're busy, it's not easy to do that sometimes. And it's always good to have a CPA who can look over the shoulder of the people in your business who are handling your cash.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that thought too. You mentioned risk, being finely attuned with the numbers is a skill set that not a lot of people have. I'll definitely say that's not my unique ability, right? And it's critical for a small business. It's critical for an early business or someone who's taking over acquiring another business.
It's
because
really
it lives on the month.
Yes, it's really critical for any business because that's an ongoing issue. That issue doesn't go away. Cash flow is king.
Yeah, well said.
Yeah.
Okay, good. So I love that. So CPA, minding the budgets and I know the good CPAs will also kind of give you a ledger almost to follow. Like, hey, you want to keep this category of costs down to about here. You're way over on this. We got to figure out what's going on here. You got to bump this up a little bit. We got to get a little more marketing. You know what I mean? That kind of thing.
Absolutely. And CPAs, like any business person, they're more experienced in one typical type of business or several types of businesses than other businesses. So finding somebody who has experience in your business is critical, particularly if you're in the startup phase and you don't have that experience yourself.
Yeah.
So getting aligned with professional advisors who know your business is critical.
So we mentioned the three horsemen so far being the broker, big part of that, right? Helping you make sure you're getting the right opportunities at the right skill set for you, et cetera, right? And then also the CPA, critical to have mastery around those numbers. If that's not your unique ability, make sure you got somebody who is. Hanging out with Marshal A. Scarr here, partner at Peterson & Price. Marshal, what's the third one? The legal. Let's unpack that a little bit.
Sure. The legal advisor is also an important part of your business. How you use them and when you use them varies a lot depending on the nature of the business. If you're buying or selling, you really want a legal advisor there because they'll have experience in transactions that you don't have. You also want somebody who can either help you should you get sued or can at least guide you to somebody who they know is good to represent you if you've been sued. That's just, when you use your legal advisor depends on what's happening in the business. The unfortunate mistake many people make with all professionals, but legal may be more so than some other professionals. Accountants you're going to see every year because you got to deal with your taxes. But lawyers, it's easy to put off seeing them. It's easy to not think about seeing them until you have the need, and that's when they may be the most critical at that point, but they can do the least. They can cut losses, but they can't avoid them.
That is so well said. I want to repeat what you said. Most people think about legal on their team when it's a little bit too late. When something goes wrong, it's when they probably need you the most critical, but it's when you can do the least.
Exactly.
That is a critical piece.
And it will cost you the most.
And will cost you the most. Preventative versus reactive.
The bang for your buck on fighting litigation is so much more painful than it is if you're trying to be proactive and try and plan to avoid.
We were joking about this before the show. There's no real winners in that game. It's just how little you lose, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that thought.
The old story is the lawyers are the only ones who win. So
well said. Been said before, too.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about some exit stuff, right? So maybe walk us down that path a little bit. What's the...
Yeah, again, my keep harping on my theme here is plan early, but frequently what happens is people get sick. Heaven forbid somebody die before they've done something, but and then their heirs are left to deal with it. But the reality is, when you're in an illiquid business, you got to plan on several years in advance to be able to get out of the business.
And whoever has 7 years when it's death or health?
Yeah,
rarely.
And I meant to say several rather than 7, but 7 wouldn't be a bad start.
Yeah.
But it's not going to be a 6-month process typically to maximize your result on selling your business if you have to get out of it. I know had a client a couple years ago who had a unique business. He had a little warehouse on the waterfront. He stocked fishing boats for the 7-day trips for deep sea fishing kind of things.
Interesting.
He would get their supplies. They would call him as they were returning to shore. He'd had everything ready. Get up at 3 a.m. and be on the dock at 5.
What a great thing to outsource.
With a load of supplies, get them loaded up before the new fisher people came on board for their next trip.
Yeah.
And it was very time sensitive in terms of what he did. Difficult business because literally he would be up at pre-dawn hours almost every day of the week and work from 3 a.m. to maybe noon. That's not something everybody wants to do.
Yeah.
As an everyday 52-week-a-year kind of business. Selling that business was incredibly hard. He worked with a broker for about a 2-year period, had a few people who were interested, and never achieved a sale. Finally retired and never realized the value that he had in a business that was generating several $100,000 a year.
What was the lesson?
The lesson is you really have to plan far in advance. And there are some businesses like that one where you really need to think about finding somebody to bring in who can eventually take over for you. Because it's not something, even if he had found a buyer immediately, he would have had to train them for months. And it was difficult to get anybody to make that kind of commitment.
That's interesting. So what I'm hearing you say as a great call to action, right? You might frame it that way, is first of all, going back to your theme from even the first segment, assemble your team and assemble it as early as possible, right?
Absolutely. And
create the structure that you need. You might not need all those horsemen for what you're doing specifically, but maybe the CPA is a critical piece that you can't overlook, or who knows? You might need 2 more we didn't even talk about, but the earlier, the better, especially when you're dealing with an entrance and an exit strategy. My man, Marshal A. Scarr, you can catch him, by the way, over in his normal digs as a partner over at Peterson & Price. You can voyeur in on them online at petersonprice.com, or you can call him to make sure you got him on your team as early as possible, as upstream as possible, to make sure that you're protecting yourself from risk and all the other what-ifs. You can call him at 619-234-0361.